It's Adam here for PC Monitors, and in this video I'm going to be taking a look at the ASUS ProArt Calibration software. So the monitor I'm using at the moment is the ASUS PA32DC. This is unique amongst the ProArt models because it has an internal or embedded calibrator, motorized colorimeter, at the top of the screen there. But you can use this software with other ProArt models as well. You can use it with various external calibrators, including ones from X-Rite, which would now be branded as Calibrite, Datacolor, and also Klein instruments. So there's some different versions of the ProArt software. The version I'm using now has only just been released, and it's one which was included on the download page for the PA32DC. Rather than there being one central download for this software, you'll actually find it on the product page for your specific ProArt model. It's not something which you can use on all ProArt models, but as long as they support hardware calibration, which means they have a hardware addressable LUT or lookup table, that means you can use this software. And what it'll do is it'll overwrite the presets of the monitor, or you can create your own custom targets. You can customize these and save it to the user mode settings. So there's user mode 1 and user mode 2. So the first section here, it says color calibration. And if you've got multiple ProArt monitors attached, you could select them in this drop-down list, which one you actually want to be calibrating. And what this is going to do is it's going to write to these presets. So the standard mode is the factory default mode. And the exact things you'll see here, it'll depend on the model you're using. It won't have necessarily exactly the same presets as mine does. But you can calibrate both SDR and HDR. So you can see here there are some presets with HDR in front of them. This one has a little HDR symbol as well. This one doesn't, but they're actually both HDR. Not sure why that one has a specific HDR symbol, but never mind. And there are various different color temperature options here. Some of these will have the flexibility in the OSD to adjust brightness, color temperature, gamma, that kind of thing. So although you may be choosing a specific target, for example, gamma 2.2, that doesn't mean you can't select something else in the OSD after the calibration. And the brightness target, again, that applies to the calibration, and that's what it's going to be going for the calibration, but you can adjust that in the OSD. And if you're just adjusting brightness, that shouldn't significantly affect your calibration results anyway. If you're not happy with these targets or at the restrictions applying to that specific preset, so let's say you wanted to do an Adobe RGB calibration, but you wanted to target a gamma of 2.4, perhaps a different color temperature, whatever it might be, then just select the user mode 1, user mode 2. If I wanted to do a DCI-P3 calibration, I can select DCI-P3. It then selects the color gamut DCI-P3. You can't change it there, that you change it by selecting the different target settings there. And you can see the same customization options. Some of the others have different customization options. So DICOM, for example, works differently in terms of its luminance targets. And if I wanted to do an HDR calibration, then you're setting a limit to the luminance, or you can have it set to max to use the full capabilities of the monitor. And color temperature is locked. EOTF PQ, that's for HDR10, or you can have it set to hybrid log gamma, HLG, or Dolby Vision. The PA32DC does actually support Dolby Vision as well, and quite a few of the other ProArt monitors with sort of a high level of HDR support will also support this, but I'm using a pre-release sample, so it doesn't have Dolby Vision listed here. You can select the brightness target yourself, so you could go 160 candles per meter squared, color temperature 6500K, EOTF, so you can have it tracking the sRGB gamma curve, or if you select gamma there, you can choose a specific gamma curve that you want the monitor to follow. There's also DICOM, which is specific to DICOM. That's not something I use myself, but if you do use that, then you can select that as a target as well. So what this is going to do is it's going to overwrite my user mode 1 preset with the calibration using these targets. You can press Start Calibration. There's also calibration appointments. I'm just very quickly going to go through this. So if you want, you can have the monitor calibrate. So it's using the settings you just selected. So this would be overwriting user mode 1 with these specific targets. And you can choose the calibrator you want to use. So you can select to use the embedded calibrator if that's an option, or you can select one of these other devices. And if you select the X-Rite I1 Display Pro or Pro Plus, also be aware that there's a calibrator profile option. What this allows you to do by pressing the folder icon is you can load an EDR file. Some people may be familiar with them. You can usually find them just floating around on the internet. People create them. And what this does is it basically adds some corrections to the colorimeter based on the backlight or the light source of the monitor, so it can be more accurate, more tuned to the spectrum, so that would potentially improve the accuracy of the adjustments made. I wouldn't fuss too much about this in general. I think you're going to get really good results even without this with most displays anyway. So the model I'm using here, the PA32DC, that is an OLED monitor, has a very wide color gamut, and I tested with the X-Rite device. I tested with just with the default profile, the embedded Calibrator, and also the Data Color Spider X. What I found is the internal Calibrator works really well. This is certainly something you can rely upon, certainly something you can use. The results were quite consistent with my X-Rite. I cross-checked this visually, I cross-checked it with other applications as well as the reporting feature of the ProArt Calibration software. Anyway, if you're interested in all of this, the color reproduction section of the PA32DC review, I link to that in the description of this video. You can check out some of the reports there and some information I include with my findings with the Spider device as well, which I didn't find quite as good. Not to say it's bad, but it didn't seem to get on with this particular model. So I do give some thoughts about that there. You then press next. So remember, I'm setting an appointment here. So you can have a schedule. So you can have it at a start date of, this is sort of several minutes from now, basically. That's when it's going to be doing it. If you want just a single calibration. If I knew I wasn't going to be using my screen, say at 4 o'clock today, and I wanted it to just do its thing, calibrate it for me without me being there, then you can do that. You can have weekly repeats set, so you can have it set to calibrate every week, 2 weeks, etc., up to 52 weeks on a given day. And you can do the same monthly as well, on a specific day of the month, once every 1 month, 6 months, 12 months, whatever it is. And after it's calibrated, you can have it so it can shut down the computer. So if you're going to be leaving it for a while and you just want it to calibrate and then shut down afterwards, you can do that, or you can have it send the computer to sleep afterwards instead. So it's now on to step 3. This is how you set the reminders. So it'll give you a reminder 10 minutes before the calibration, and that'll look something like this on the screen. So there's a little notification just in the bottom right there. You can set an additional reminder time as well if you want to. But you'll see when the reminder comes up, you can just press basically calibrate now. You can postpone the reminder, so it'll give you another one, or you can just ignore it and it will just stick to the original schedule. Step 4. It then says, do you want the calibration to include a warm-up period? So that will give you half an hour before it actually does the calibration. So it'll make sure that the monitor is properly warmed up at the target brightness, which you've set for the calibration. Or you can skip that, particularly if you know you're going to have the monitor on for a while before that at sort of a similar brightness or a high brightness, then that's fine. It's going to be warmed up anyway, not a problem. Step 5 just gives you some information. You press complete, and then what it will do, you don't have to have this running. You can close the program completely after you press complete, that is, and it will run the calibration at your preferred schedule. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to run through the calibration process. I'm not going to use a schedule. I'm just going to do it in the normal way, so to speak, start calibration. So I'm going to overwrite my user mode 1. Let's go for Adobe RGB with the targets I mentioned earlier. It then says, make sure the USB or Thunderbolt cable is connected to your monitor properly. So you do need to have a USB cable connected to the monitor. It may be via USB-C if your monitor supports that, or it may be the USB type B upstream port, so that's the sort of square looking one. It's basically your upstream cable. It really just needs to be able to upload data to the monitor so it can load in your profile. Then press next, goes on to step 2. Also be aware you may have additional steps on your unit, your ProArt model, because it may be able to perform uniformity compensation, which means it'll make some brightness adjustments at various points of the screen. This model is an OLED monitor, it doesn't need to do that, it doesn't even have a backlight, so that's not an option here, but you may see an additional steps. You might actually have 4 steps here. So again, you select the calibrator type. I'm just going to use the embedded calibrator here. Also be aware there are some limitations. I know I said the Spider X device, I wouldn't say it's ideal, but it's decent, but there are some limitations to be aware of. For example, it says Spider X only supports brightness up to 650 nits. So if you've got a ProArt model that's particularly bright under HDR and you want to be doing an HDR calibration, then be aware of that limitation. Also, just a more general point about the data color devices, they're not very good at accurately recording very low luminance levels. For example, with this model, it was telling me that my black point was 0.09 nits, which is complete rubbish. It's 0.00 nits and the room is completely dark, so there wasn't any light leakage causing that. I've noticed this with other software using the Spider devices as well, which means that the contrast readings they throw up and the readings for very dark shades are not very good. So just be aware of that limitation if you're using one of those. It doesn't generally upset the calibration itself, except it would under HDR. So we move on to step 3. I'm just going to brighten the room up a little bit so you can actually see the embedded calibrator physically move, because it's quite cool. I quite like this feature. It's only currently found on the PA32DC, but I would expect further ProArt models in the future to feature this. It's a really neat little feature. They seem to be just testing it out with this model, or it's the first model they've used it with as far as I'm aware. So there you go, brighten the room up so you can see the little calibrator. So if you're using an external calibrator, you'll put it in the middle of the screen, and that's where this little box would be, so you'd know where to put it. You then press start, and it'll start the calibration process. So it's now flicking into position, it's taking some brightness readings. The whole process, the whole calibration process from start to finish, I'm not going to show you the entire thing because that would be incredibly boring, but I'm just going to show you the key steps for it. The whole process will take under 10 minutes, so it's not a long process. So the embedded calibrator is now removing itself from the screen. That's just because it's going to go on to the next step, so it's done the brightness readings. There's a little bit of waiting. Then it says brightness measurement complete. And if you now press start to really start the main calibration, it says skip warm up. The monitor has not warmed up yet. It doesn't know if it has or not. It just knows that you haven't waited 30 minutes on this particular screen. So if you want to do that, you know you haven't had the monitor on for very long, fine, do that. But otherwise, and I know my monitor's been on for ages now, just press skip. Then you have to press start, and it will perform the rest of the calibration, or the main calibration procedure. It's also good practice to make sure the room's as dark as possible when doing this. Colorimeters, they're generally quite good at blocking out external light, so it doesn't affect things too much. But if you've got bright light striking the screen, it could have a little bit of leakage into the calibration sensor, so it can affect things. So ideally, you would have the room as dark as possible. So you'll see it just has various different test patches. It's just on whites or grey shades at the moment, various other shades now. But don't worry, I'm not going to make you watch the entire process. As I said, that will become very tedious. It's now moved on to please wait for writing data, and it does this for a few minutes, about 2 minutes since I last spoke, and it's still doing this, so it does take a little bit of time, this particular step. It then performs some quick checks, so the test patches are back. It's taking a few more measurements, checking the post-corrected state. It then gives you a report. I'm not sure how clear this will be in the video because it's quite small, so what I'm going to do is I will show you an exported version of this report, or show you in the report history in the application very shortly, but just at a casual glance it looks like it's done a good calibration here. So you press apply if you're happy with all of that, and then it will actually upload it, finalize the upload to the monitor. So that will become your user mode 1 preset, or whichever preset you've selected. So if you were, for example, overwriting Adobe RGB, then your Adobe RGB factory calibration would be overwritten with this new calibration. And don't worry, you can revert to the original, the factory calibration, which I'll show you very shortly. So just take a little bit of time to actually upload it to the monitor. It's still doing that. You'll see the screen change a little bit as it's doing this as well. So it has uploaded it to the monitor, but what it did this time is it just completely closed without another prompt. Sometimes you get a prompt on the screen which will look something like this. So it says keep your customized target. You can give the target a name and then you can save it. It might be that I've used these particular parameters before that I just used for my Adobe RGB calibration in exactly the same way and already saved a customized target. So perhaps it doesn't need to do that again. I'm not sure. It just seems it sometimes doesn't do this. The only other bug I had with the application, by the way, it generally worked really well, but occasionally it would quit the calibration just after doing the initial brightness measurements, and then I'd have to reopen it and it worked fine. I only found it did this if I did multiple calibrations in a row, a string of calibrations without closing the application. It opens up very quickly, so honestly, after you've done a calibration, just close it, open it up again if you want to do another one, and that should work quite consistently. With all of that in mind, be aware that you can make it do a string of calibrations, so I could calibrate all of these presets one after another by ticking multiple boxes here, but because of what I've just said, I would advise just doing one at a time and closing the application after each run. So the next option here, customize target, that shows various calibrations that I've done before where I've saved the customized target in the way I just showed you before. It didn't give me that prompt this time for whatever reason, but probably because I've done this exact thing before. And if you now press apply, that will just take you to the calibration process with all of these particular values already preloaded for you. Next, you've got task management. So there's history, and that will show you all the calibrations that you've done. So I just did the Adobe RGB calibration listed here. If you click report, you can see the report again, and you can export the report if you want to look at it in a bit more detail. And you can press export report, which I'm going to do now so I can show you a larger version of this report. So I've just saved it to my desktop. I've got 2 pages to the report. So the first page here, so that shows you the targets you've selected, and that shows you the result. If you're not happy with the result, by the way, maybe you didn't press apply, you can just cancel the calibration and redo it, because you will find a little bit of variation between runs. So if you want to get things even tighter, then just rerun the calibration, you can do that. But this is all very good. It shows you the measured gamut versus the target gamut. So the measured is red, the target is orange. Really nice match of Adobe RGB recorded there. Depending on your monitor, the match may not be that close. It really just depends on the monitor and the native gamut capabilities of that. It also gives you a little summary. It shows you the gamma tracking. It says your average delta E results 0.45, so it meets the standard, which I believe is just anything below delta E of 2 on average. I think that's their sort of broad standard. Grayscale tracking as well. Then page 2 of the report. That shows you specific test patches and the results there. So this had quite a high delta E for the pure black, but that was because when I first did the calibration, I actually had quite a lot of light hitting the screen because I was trying to show you the calibrator itself. But here's a calibration run I did earlier in a proper dark room. So you'll see the delta E for that patch is much better. Again, this is why I would encourage you to have the room as dark as you possibly can, and certainly not having direct light striking the screen surface as I did when I first started this calibration process that I was showing you. Just thought I'd quickly show you, and you might see the calibration reminders on the screen because I've got an appointment and I can postpone that. I can decline it, or I can just calibrate it now. I'm actually going to just postpone that for a little bit so I can continue with the video. So this is an example of a report you'd get if you're doing an HDR calibration for the monitor. And again, the gamut here, it'll depend on the model. So the PA32DC covers around 80% of the Rec 2020 color space. So you can see there's quite a bit of missing coverage in the green region in particular, the green to blue edge. There's a bit of missing coverage in the red region as well. Rec 2020 is a very large gamut. See there, 80.13% measured. But you get an EOTF curve rather than the sort of gamma curve you might see under SDR. Grayscale tracking, that's the first page of the report. The second page of the report, it doesn't have the same kind of color patches. This will give you a report of various different grayscale shades, various different brightnesses. That's not to say it doesn't tune other things, it's just that the report really focuses on this aspect. Something to be aware of if you've calibrated the monitor with HDR. First of all, don't run the monitor in HDR, run the monitor under SDR. If you try and run it under HDR, I believe it'll just turn that off anyway, and it'll just revert to SDR in Windows, so perhaps it has a fail-safe for that. But it is designed to run the calibration under SDR, not under HDR. The monitor's capabilities, it'll basically switch to its sort of HDR capable brightness and that kind of thing automatically. It'll do that all for you, so you don't need to run it under HDR to calibrate for HDR with the ProArt software. I'm going to switch over to user mode 2, which is an HDR calibration, which I did using the software. You might be able to see in the video, the colours are all messed up. This may vary between models, certainly with the model I was testing. This is what things look like under SDR, but if I switch over to HDR with the Windows toggle, things look much better. I mean, this is an SDR environment. I'm not showing you HDR content. This is just the desktop, but even then the colours don't look as funky. They don't look quite right. You know, I explore this in my reviews. You generally don't want to be just running HDR all the time. It's only really for when you're actually going to be looking at HDR content. But things look in place in terms of the calibration. But if I now switch to one of the preset HDR modes of the monitor, then I switch back to my user mode 2, the colours are completely messed up again. I'm not sure how clear this is in the video, but to my eye, clearly not what things are supposed to look like at all. But if I toggle HDR off, then on again in Windows or in the application which I'm using, trying to run HDR with, then it will correct it. Like so. Now I'm not sure if this kind of thing happens with all ProArt models, if it always happens with the PA32DC, if it's just my pre-release sample, I don't really know. But what I would say as well is that generally the pre-calibrated HDR presets are really good on these monitors as well, so do feel free to use them. If you want the highest level of colour accuracy and you've got your own calibration, just stick to that. Try not to switch presets when you're running HDR, then things should work just fine for you as well. So the next bit of task management is appointment. So I've already shown you the appointment feature, and I've got one listed here which I postponed just before. If you click that, you'll see what it's going to be doing. So it's going to be overwriting my standard mode preset. If you want to modify the calibration appointment, you can press that, make some little changes there. If you decided to completely scrap this, then you can do that as well. Delete. Only a few more things to go through. If you press device, this is how you decide which of your custom calibrations apply to which preset, or if you want the presets to be using the factory defaults instead. So if you press this, it's got a list of all of the calibrations you've done. So you can say what you want user mode 1 to be, user mode 2 to be. You can have these set to factory defaults. And if you've overwritten some of these, it would have a drop down as well. But you see I did overwrite the sRGB preset once. And if I wanted to use my custom calibration for that, I can. And then you just press apply at the bottom there. If you want to reset all of this to the factory default, so wipe your custom calibration, you press reset, and that will reset everything to the factory defaults. The final thing, this isn't going to apply to any model at the moment, but the PA32DC or any model in the future which they decide to put this internal calibrator on. And I honestly hope they do, because I think it's a really neat feature. This is designed to calibrate the Calibrator. So colorimeters, they do drift over time. So to maintain the accuracy of the embedded Calibrator, they recommend that every 6 months you do a correlation with sort of a reliable external colorimeter. What I would say is that in my experience, and this applies to external calibrators, they also drift over time. I wouldn't expect massive drift over a 6-month period, but if you're going to be using this for several years, then you probably will want to do this correlation process. And when you carry out this correlation process, you again select the calibrator you're using. If you've got the X-Rite or Calibrite unit, then again you can load your spectral corrections as well. And just the final thing, not specific to the embedded calibrator or this model, is the little I information at the top there. That just shows the software version. So I've been showing you software version 3.0.0. You may have a different version. Check for updates. It'll check for updates to the software. It says I've already got the latest version. There's also a calibrator placement tutorial. This is really neat. It just shows you a little thing in the middle of the screen just to show you that that's where you're going to be putting the calibrator, but when you perform the calibration it will show you where to put the calibrator anyway, so it seems a little bit of an odd feature, but never mind. You then have to just press that little X at the top to get back to where you were. I know there are some typos here, maybe they'll be fixed in newer versions of the software, and just a few little useful links there. So that's really all there is to the ASUS ProArt Calibration software. If you want to see some additional report examples with the embedded calibrator of this model, also using the X-Rite unit, then be sure to check out the color reproduction section of the PA32DC review, which is linked to in the description of the video. You'll also see information there about how you can support the work that we do. Be aware that liking the video, subscribing to the channel if you haven't already, really nice way of showing your support as well.